Okay, but let's get down to the nuts and bolts. The stock market is crashing.
Mm-hmm.
You need to invest in gold and silver if you want to stay alive.
The stock market was rotten to its core.
Absolutely. But are you telling people to leave, to go to South America?
No,
what's your advice?
I'm telling people that you're in for some difficult times. And I say this in my presentations. I jokingly look at them and say, you're all doomed. There's not a one of you that's going to be around 100 years from now. You're doomed. So to hell with it. Enjoy the ride. No, I tell people who are interested in listening for whatever it is I have to say, that you're in for some difficult times. It's going to happen. There is no way to avoid it. We cannot go on as we were, because some of our systems were rotten to the core, and our banking system, the insurance programs, all of that, stock market, Wall Street, those guys were absolutely rotten.
The housing industry?
The housing industry. That was bound to fail. You talk about a bubble, it was bound to fail. It had to fail. Well, I'm glad it failed. Hope to hell that they learned something from it. No.
Okay, but are we talking about martial law in the United States? I mean, what are we talking here?
You're talking about a time when you may have martial law. It's only one step away. You know that the authority has been given to the president to declare it.
Right.
The Congress gave that authority to the president years ago. I've even lost track of how long it's been. But anyhow, all the president has to do, whoever he may be, and that doesn't matter much anymore either, because one nitwit is very much like the other. You have a national emergency, and it's declared.
Right.
Boom. Martial law. You declare a national emergency, which has not been declared yet.
Right.
But we're right on the edge of it.
Right.
And you're going to have martial law.
Okay, but we don't have an election, right?
Well, you're thinking about an October surprise.
I have no idea. I'm asking you.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure it'll happen in October. I suspect it may occur within the next year. But I don't know. I haven't had any dreams. My dreams have been pretty fascinating recently, but none of them have been terribly troubling. And I know this is all happening. It's going to take place. It's inevitable. It's been orchestrated. The Illuminati do exist. They are in power. They've been in power for years. They've been demonstrating that power ever since 1913, when they created the hell is it, this banking system? The
Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve, yeah, which is a private corporation. We lost most of it in '47. I don't know whether you were aware of that, but that was a big year. National security became everything. It became the member of the triad. '47, we declared, we made the National Security Agency. We formed a pact with the Brits, the Australians, the Canadians, and New Zealanders. The UKUSA Pact, which most people don't even know exists. The UKUSA crowd, all of us, Britain, US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, are all like this. Whoever's in the White House and who's ever at Buckingham Palace, it don't matter.
All right.
The power behind the scenes has been running this damn thing since 1947. And Ike saw it. Scared the hell out of him. He met the Anunnaki. That scared the hell out of him. So they're pulling our strings now like they always have.
Okay. So what's your solution? What would you tell people? I mean, in facing the future, in trying to reinvent the future, certainly Marsha's working with people to become enlightened, to
She's doing
apply.
a tremendous amount of work to help people make this transition. Carrie, we're not just going through a transition, we're going through a transcendent transformation, literally. A transcendent transformation. We're going to come out of this thing when it's all over with, totally different species. We're not going to be the same people we were in the past. And that's good. And it's going to hurt, and it's going to be painful. And I tell people, and I've said this repeatedly, don't get too uptight about it. You've been through hell before. You're going through a bit of it again. But once it's over, once you've made that transition, we're going to have, hopefully, a new world, a new future, a new beginning. And I think that's the end of the great year that we're going through. We're going through the end of a 26,000-year cycle. And I tell you, 2012 don't matter. Mm-hmm. First of all, Christ was born 7 years before. And this is a fact. And if you don't believe me, get Sir Lawrence Gardner, who's probably one of the best historians we've got working today. Lawrence Gardner's got the facts. Jesus was born in 7 BC on the 1st of March. Now, if you want to count from his birth, like we supposedly have been doing, add 7 years to 2008. You end up with 2015. That's pretty close to what 2020...
so you're saying we're actually in the year 2015 now?
No, we're in the year 2015 right now.
Right. So
Yes.
that means that Nibiru, when you say it's coming in 2020, is actually due in about 5 years.
Probably.
So we're looking at 2013 by our calendar.
Well, no later than 2017. I'll throw 2017 out,
Okay.
and you can take that to the bank. 2017. Now,
Okay.
that'll give or take a year or two, because the celestial mechanics, they haven't really worked it all out yet. We've got computers you wouldn't believe, but they're still trying to feed in some of the data.
So is one of the remote viewers, you're in touch with Ingo Swann?
I haven't been in touch with Ingo for some time, but Carrie, I've been doing some remote viewing.
Right.
I've even had a couple of out-of-body experiences. Mm-hmm. I've been doing a lot of meditating. When you step into that world, there is no time. Mm-hmm. And you can talk to anybody, everywhere, all at once. Mm-hmm. And now, that sounds silly to anyone who doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. When you step into that realm of timelessness, and you remote view, and you step out of your body, and you go into altered states, and you meditate, you're in a timeless, infinite reality that people communicate. You'd be shocked and amazed at the wealth of information that's out there just to tap into. The old ones used to talk about the Akashic record. Mm-hmm. It's real. It's real. And it isn't just about the past, because, Carrie, there is no past. Nor is there a future. There's only an eternal now. And a physicist sitting here in this room would say balderdash, because they wouldn't grasp for a minute what I'm trying to talk about. But old Ingo would.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been some of those places myself that you're talking about.
I knew it, you see.
And so I have to say you're absolutely right. And it's incredible pleasure for us to hear this from yourself. And I would like to, at this time, just open the floor and say, is there anything that we haven't covered here that you would like to talk about? And then, of course, we would also like to invite Bill to ask you some questions.
We've danced around on a whole bunch of things for the last hour. I enjoy it. I enjoy chatting with you two guys. You're pleasant people. Mm-hmm. As I say, I'm an old codger, and you plug me in and turn me loose. There's no telling where I may end up. I've been around 79 years this trip. I've made a dozen or two previous trips. which amazingly I remember quite a bit about. When you start going into that timeless realm, you step into that infinite, which we're all part of. Memories of other lives come flooding into you sometimes. Mm-hmm. Oh God, the things I've seen, the things I've done, the places I've been, this life are kind of shocking. The things I've done, the places I've been, and the lives I've lived before are beyond belief. I'm not boasting. This is not a boast. Mm-hmm. But I'm an old soul. I've been around on this planet a long time. And I amazingly remember it. Some of the memories I would rather not remember because they're painful. Mm-hmm. Hell, I have memories of Sumer. I knew the Anunnaki back then. Worked with them. I was one of their products. I know them now. And I don't have any fear. And in bringing this to a close, I would like to say to whoever is watching, get rid of the fear. You have nothing to fear. You are an immortal, timeless being who has an infinite future in a glorious universe that's so filled with beauty and life that we on this little tiny planet couldn't begin to grasp. But I say to people, don't be afraid, for God's sake. Gather around you those you love. Spread that love around. And go into tomorrow with courage. Because you've been through a hell of a lot worse before. So be hopeful, love one another, and have courage. And that's really all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Bob Dean. It's really an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, Carrie.
Priorities at the National Press Club. Another reason why it's so important that this event is being held here today. We were extremely active in the James Risen case, and in 2012 we gave Risen one of our highest honors, the John Aubuchon Press Freedom Award. And of course, for Risen and other journalists to do their jobs, they need information, they need sources, they need people to tell them what is going on. And here we are today in another matter tied to the Risen case here in 2015, still talking about it. But that is why it's fitting that this is the venue for the news conference about whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling. So I want to welcome you here today, and in particular I want to welcome Jeffrey's wife, Holly. Thank her for being here today. And I want to, again, thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank you for holding this important event here at the National Press Club. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Norman. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to welcome you to the news conference today, which is co-sponsored by Exposed Facts, a program of the Institute for Public Accuracy, also Reporters Without Borders, and also rootsaction.org. I should mention at the outset that while each so-called whistleblower case in legal terms is unique with some unique aspects, there are common threads to government policy and prosecution that need to be addressed. We call Jeffrey Sterling a whistleblower because it's incontrovertible, and I sat through the entire trial and nobody questions, that he went to the Senate Intelligence Committee with concerns and information that he had gained as a case officer at the Central Intelligence Agency. So really nobody can question that Jeffrey Sterling is a whistleblower. He met with the Senate Intelligence Committee staff in early 2003. At the same time, when the long prosecution of Jeffrey Sterling went to trial in January of this year in federal district court, he maintained and continues to maintain to this moment, as he's now in prison, that he's innocent of all the charges that he provided classified information to James Risen that went into his book published in 2006, State of War. We have a number of speakers here, and in the interest of time, and I should have mentioned I don't know if I mentioned my name, Norman Solomon, a coordinator of Exposed Facts as well as rootsaction.org. But I should say that in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through reading out people's biographies. This sheet that you have that says News Conference Thursday, October 15th, has biographical information in the sequence of the speakers. So we will hear from each person seated at the table, and then we certainly are going to leave time for Q&A. So without further ado, Jesselyn Radak.
Good morning. I'm Jesselyn Radak, and I head the Whistleblower and Source Protection Program at Exposed Facts. I do not represent Jeffrey Sterling, but I do represent half a dozen other whistleblowers investigated, charged, and prosecuted under the Espionage Act. The Obama administration has presided over the most draconian crackdown on national security and intelligence whistleblowers in U.S. history. The Justice Department has used the antiquated Espionage Act as a bludgeon to threaten, coerce, silence, and imprison whistleblowers for alleged mishandling of classified information. Meanwhile, powerful and politically connected individuals accused of the same and much worse conduct receive, at most, a slap on the wrist, like General David Petraeus, who gave away more secret information classified at a much higher level to his mistress and received a sweetheart plea deal for a minor misdemeanor. Or Hillary Clinton. She got a primetime TV apologist political spin interview from President Obama himself, and she will likely be our next president. Sterling's conviction is a gross miscarriage of justice. The Espionage Act has become a strict liability law, meaning that the prosecution does not have to prove that the whistleblower had any intent to harm the United States or benefit a foreign nation. Worse, Sterling's conviction is based on flimsy circumstantial evidence that almost certainly would not result in a conviction except under the very vague and overbroad Espionage Act. Taking a step back from the criminal trial that brought us here today, and putting aside Jim Risen's book and anything written there about the botched CIA program that gave rise to the Iranians' nuclear intelligence, I would like to remind everyone that Jeffrey Sterling is a whistleblower. Sterling is a whistleblower because in 2003 he met with staff from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a proper internal political channel that we're always hearing people shout about. And he made reports about what he saw as a botched CIA operation. Basically, it's hard for me to talk about this because it's so difficult to see yet another person punished in this kind of way. But Sterling's case is very reminiscent for me of a lot of my NSA clients, and especially Tom Drake, who you will hear from in a few minutes. But Tom Drake, Bill Binney, Kirk Wiebe, Ed Loomis, they also used internal government channels to report misconduct. In fact, Tom Drake also reported his concerns to the Senate Intelligence Committee, the same one that Sterling went to. And they also became the targets of a federal criminal leak investigation for a news story by Jim Risen that they had nothing to do with. Making clear that punishing whistleblowers is a backdoor way of punishing journalists, the Justice Department used a subpoena 3 times on reporter Jim Risen to dangle a sword of Damocles over the heads of both Jim Risen and Jeffrey Sterling for nearly a decade, and argued vociferously against any sort of legally protected reporter source privilege. In these attacks on the press, too often the forgotten victims, unfortunately, are the whistleblowers like Sterling. I urge President Obama to grant him a pardon. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Thomas Drake.
What we have in the Sterling case is an absolute travesty of justice. Apparently in this country, national security reigns supreme. It trumps everything. The primacy of national security gives the elite and those in privileged positions of power no accountability. It gives them immunity from any attempt to hold them responsible. And yet we have an administration that has no problem licensing unto itself the authorization to leak to the press on an extraordinary level. In fact, leaking highly classified sources and methods for political purposes and to present themselves in the best possible light. And yet, if you go to an intel committee, which provides oversight on the secret side of government, or if you dare go to the press or have any contact with the press at all, under any circumstances, then you'll be charged with espionage. But the last time I checked, real spies don't go to the press. Real spies go to other spies. Real spies don't make public their secrets. I think it's a really important distinction to make here. And yet this administration has continued to use the bludgeon of the Espionage Act, a World War I era statute, to go after whistleblowers and truth tellers. And not only do they go after them in the Espionage Act, it's selective, it's malicious, and it's vindictive. So the problem, and of course, if you're the government, you know this. They don't like to admit it, but they will say it when necessary. If you're charged with espionage, there's no public interest defense. If you go to the Oversight Committee and we decide you might have given something to them that we don't like that gave to them, even though they have oversight responsibilities, that's no defense either. So here you are practicing the First Amendment redress in the public interest, and you find yourself criminalized. And that's what's happened in this country. Parallels between the Sterling case and what happened to Jeffrey and what happened to me are extremely close. Their investigation of me went over many, many years, as it did with Jeffrey Sterling. I myself went to the intelligence committees. I blew every whistleblower channel that existed under every statute and act. And yes, I did have contact with the press in the public interest. And yet we have what the government would say is simply individuals like myself and Jeffrey Sterling who have personal grievances. Personal grievances. That what we did violated the signatures we signed, violated agreements we signed with our respective intelligence agencies. I also used to work at the CIA, so I had non-disclosure agreements myself, although they can't be used for cover or violation of law or statute. And so here we are. But I just like to raise a couple of things that are extraordinary between my criminal case and Jeffrey Sterling's case. He was often forgotten, in some cases tragically so, even by the press, because of Risen. And recognizing that Risen ultimately did report a number of things, did have sources, but it's the sources are the ones that are taking the real brunt of the unprecedented attack against the press, against freedom of information, and particularly against anybody who dare expose government wrongdoing and malfeasance in the public interest. And it's an extraordinary double standard. But the chief prosecutor in my case was also the chief prosecutor in the Sterling case, William Welsh. Rather checkered history, but he made a claim and an attempt in my case, which was really a foreshadowing of what happened in the Sterling case. And he tested the judge in my case, threatening to bring the reporter into the courtroom. Now, in my case, the judge would have nothing to do with it. He said, we're not going to go down that deep, dark hole. In the Sterling case, Judge Brinkman said, yes. She allowed the subpoenas to happen, although in the end, Risen did not have to actually be forced or attempted to force to testify in Sterling's case. Eyewitness. The allegation was made by the chief prosecutor Welsh that Risen was the only eyewitness to a crime and that that criminal was Jeffrey Sterling. They were never able to actually prove it in the courtroom, but it's an extraordinary double standard because the former Attorney General of the United States of America, Eric Holder, I'm going to quote, in saying what happened to Sterling, quote, the defendant's unauthorized disclosures of classified information compromise operations undertaken in defense of America's national security. The disclosures placed lives at risk. Parenthetical insert. Chief prosecutor in my case said that what I did endangered the lives of American soldiers and that I had blood on my hands. I continue with the Holder quote. And they constituted an egregious breach of the public trust by someone who had sworn to uphold it. As this verdict proves, it is possible to fully prosecute unauthorized disclosures that inflict harm upon our national security without interfering with journalists' ability to do their jobs. Anybody see the Democratic debate the other night and things that Clinton said about Snowden? This is a Secretary of State, one of the most targeted individuals by other intelligence agencies and entities in the world, using a private server to traffic in highly sensitive information. And no doubt, including classified information, and no doubt, information including sources and methods. But hey, I'm Secretary of State. Even Obama gave her cover. This is what's happened in this country, an extraordinary double standard. And the last thing Hillary Clinton is a whistleblower. All for political purposes. So you have, in my case and in Jeffrey Sterling's case, we bear the full punishment. We bear the burden of the politics of outright and abject personal destruction. We as sources, whether to hold up a mirror to those things in government that are wrong, that violate the law, that actually are in fact endangering our national security. We're the ones that pay the high price. We're the ones that are put up on the altar of national security as sacrifices. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Holly Sterling.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm here on behalf of my husband, Jeffrey Sterling. And really, I just want to tell you about Jeffrey, the real Jeffrey, not the person that the government has portrayed him to be. And also to let you know that I did write an open letter to President Obama asking for his immediate pardon. So Jeffrey was born and raised in Cape Girardeau. He was the youngest of 6 boys raised by a single mother. And he had aspirations to be a great person from early on in his life. He went to high school, immediately went to college at Millikan University, had a degree in political science, and then went on to Washington University and pursued a Juris Doctorate. It was in his 3rd year of law school where he had seen an advertisement to travel the world and serve your country, which 3 of his brothers had done in the military, and he wanted to follow in their footsteps. So with that, Jeffrey immediately went home and started the process to become a case officer with the CIA. While he was working at the Public Defender's Office, he actually was informed that the CIA wanted to hire him. And so he became a case officer and pursued his dream. Jeffrey, shortly as he was working there, was doing a great job until approximately about 2007, when he was supposed to have his first overseas post. It was at that time, right before he was leaving, his supervisor came to him and said, "We've given it to another person." Jeffrey asked why. He wasn't given an answer, except that they had felt that he would actually stick out as a big black man speaking Farsi. So to that question, Jeffrey asked, "At what point did you notice that I was black?" And "You taught me how to speak Farsi." So dismayed and very upset, he was going to go to another post. He went there for a while, but unfortunately, they did not give him proper cover, nor the supports to be productive and perform his job as a case manager. He soon returned back to the United States and decided that he had had enough, that he wasn't able to successfully do the job that he was hired to do. And he filed a discrimination suit against the agency. He was the first black African-American male to file a suit against the agency. And that is really the start of everything that happened and where we're at now. Subsequently, Jeffrey was fired from his job. After he was fired, basically he was blackballed. He could not find work anywhere. He lost everything. He sold his possessions. He gave his 2 cats to a neighbor to take care of, got in his car, and made his way back to St. Louis, sleeping in his vehicle. He was lucky enough to get together with an old college friend who had just had a baby, and Jeffrey became the caretaker of that child in exchange for room and board. So here's a man that has a Juris Doctorate and was working for the CIA, and now he's taking care of a newborn baby. That's when I had the pleasure of meeting him, actually. It was in 2004 that he had finally secured a position as a health insurance fraud investigator. And Jeffrey and I had met. We met on Match.com. had 2 dates, and said we were going to get married on the beach barefoot. It was love at first sight. So Jeffrey excelled at his job at WellPoint as a health insurance fraud investigator. He received many accolades. He single-handedly found a Medicare fraud case in Florida that was about approximately $32 million, and went and testified and had the conviction of the 9 individuals that were responsible for that. On top of that, he was the ambassador of the United Way Giving for his company. He was in great standing. He was doing well. He was moving his way up in the company. Shortly after those events had happened, he had a knee replacement surgery, was on medical leave, and his boss had called him to ask him to come to work while still on medical leave. Jeffrey went to the office still using a cane, and shortly after his arrival, he was arrested by the FBI. Not only did his company helped orchestrate him to come to the office so that Jeffrey could be publicly humiliated and arrested there instead of coming to our home, knowing he's on medical leave and no threat. That was on January 6, 2011. And he was then taken to Virginia, in jail for approximately a month. Judge Brinkema did not give him the choice to come home. We went to court. We have wonderful friends that we stay with here, and asked our friend to come up to the podium and basically said, "Can Jeffrey Sterling live with you?" And she said, "Well, I think he would like to go home with his wife." And she said, "I'll put it to you this way. It's either Mr. Sterling stays with you or he goes back to jail. Which one are you going to have?" Of course, she graciously said yes. Jeffrey stayed here till approximately May, and then he was allowed to come home. He was subjected to taking drug screens, even though he has no history of substance abuse. So we basically lost everything. He was not able to get a job, although that was part of his condition, that he had to get a job. That was part of his release condition. So he tried and had to report to them all of the jobs that he was applying for. It was rejection after rejection. Subsequently, so Jeffrey's never worked since his arrest date on January 6, 2011. We were originally supposed to go to trial in October of 2011. And on the eve of that trial, William Welch, for some reason, the government could not go forward with their trial. So we went back home and waited. No answers, wondering what was going on. Well, what was going on was they were trying to get Risen to testify, and that's when it did become the Risen case. We went to the oral arguments, and Mr. Ed McMahon, Jeffrey's attorney, announced that Jeffrey was there present. Prior to the announcement, the government stated that Jeffrey Sterling was one of the most dangerous men in our country. When Mr. McMahon got up, he said, Your Honors, I would like to let you know for the record that Mr. Sterling, one of the most dangerous men, is standing here right next to me. The courtroom erupted into laughter over that statement. Jeffrey, myself, nor our lawyers thought that was really funny. It was actually a tragedy. He's been made basically to be a public spectacle. Excuse me, I get a little emotional talking about this. So we went on with our life, waiting for the trial to come. The trial came, and as many as has stated that there really was absolutely no evidence that Jeffrey had done this. We never hid the fact that Jeffrey and Mr. Risen did speak. It was in 2002 that he covered Jeffrey's discrimination suit. And his discrimination suit actually was not dismissed until 2005. So they did have a history of speaking from 2002 to 2005. That was completely disclosed. On the witness stand, the main FBI agent, Ashley Hunt, admitted during cross-examination, she has no emails, she has no telephone recordings, she has nothing that can solidify or prove that Jeffrey had reported any classified information to James Risen. In fact, she said, I have just speculated that Jeffrey did this. In addition, there was a CIA manager that had made it known that there were over 90 additional people that were briefed on Operation Merlin that could have been the person that leaked the information. Not one of those individuals was investigated ever. It was solely Jeffrey. So with that, unfortunately, somehow a jury found Jeffrey guilty on all charges. And he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. During the sentencing hearing, it was requested that Jeffrey be placed in a facility close to home. On a Thursday, we received a letter. On a Tuesday, we needed to report to the facility. That facility is in Englewood, Colorado, 900 miles away from our home. So not only has Jeffrey's life been destroyed, he hasn't had a job since January 6th of 2011. I'm a social worker. I love my job, but I don't do it for the money. We do not have savings. We do live paycheck to paycheck. In fact, we've relied on friends and family to get us back and forth to Virginia for the years of going to pretrials, hearings, and then for the hearings. And now, yet again, I have to rely on the goodwill of people to be able just to go see my husband. I've been able to go 3 times, and it's heart-wrenching to go see him there. He doesn't belong there. He's in with rapists. He's in with murderers. He's in with child molesters. These individuals, although it's a minimum security facility, have been in prison so long, 20, 25 plus years, that they've worked their way, due to good behavior, down to being in minimum security. Most of them, unfortunately, do not have education. Most of them cannot read. Most of them cannot write. And Jeffrey knows this because he is employed as a tutor there. And he's trying to help them obtain a GED. However, if you can't read or write, how are you supposed to be able to take a GED? As I said earlier, Jeffrey was a lawyer. He lost that. In the facility, he's being made to take continuing education classes. On my last visit, he said, I learned some new skills. I said, I'm almost afraid to know what those are. We try to bring some comic relief in once in a while. He said, you'd be very proud of me, Holly. I know what a checking account is, I know what a savings account is, and I know what a loan is now, and I know how to secure all those things. And I said, well, that's great, because I didn't really want to have to teach you that when you got home. He also had to take a critical thinking class. 12 hours he was supposed to study. At about 2.5 hours, he said, I'm done. Took the test, handed it up to the instructor. They said, you didn't do 12 hours. He said, I studied this ad nauseum, probably middle school, beginning of high school. I'm going to take the test. If I get a quarter wrong, I'll take your study for 12 hours and take the class again. Well, he's never heard anything back. So what does that mean? He got 100%. So one of the other things about having to see Jeffrey is, unfortunately, it's a blessing that I get to see him. I do get to sit next to him. It's not behind glass with a telephone. But for that privilege, he has to be strip searched before and after our visit. Here's a man that is intelligent, is caring, is the love of my life. And for over 10.5 years, the government has just come down on him. And it was solely because, first of all, he had the audacity to stand up for his rights as a human being, and they didn't like it. because unfortunately in this country, if you're not Caucasian, you're still no one. And then that just fueled the fire for when Jeffrey was able to have Mr. Risen cover his discrimination case. Of course, where were they going to go to? The supposed disgruntled black man that sued the CIA. And I'd like to touch on the fact that this was selective prosecution, as Thomas Drake had mentioned about General Petraeus. If you honestly looked at the two cases, my husband, of what he had allegedly done and what General Petraeus admitted to doing, if you remove it and look at it in paper, you take away the fact that you know one person is Caucasian, one person is African American. You take away that one person lives a very modest lifestyle, the other person has lots of money. You take away that the other person is a normal Joe Blow, and the other person has political clout. If you look at that, you see that General Petraeus committed far more egregious acts than what Jeffrey had allegedly done, and he did it for himself, while Jeffrey went to the Senate Select Committee because he was concerned about the citizens of our country and what this possible Operation Merlin could have done. So with General Petraeus' punishment and Jeffrey's punishment, it's basically stating and saying that the thought in this country is, if you are a Caucasian person and you do wrong, that you don't need to be punished for it, and you get a slap on the wrist. While if you are a man of color, you are guilty until proven innocent, and you belong behind bars. And so I'm just here today to let everyone know, really, the true story behind everything else that has not been out there. That Jeffrey is a wonderful man. To this day, he still says he wished that he was not discriminated against because he loved his job at the CIA and he loved serving his country. Even after everything that they have done to him, he can still say that. So at this time, I would like to just read a couple excerpts from the letter that I wrote to President Obama. The first one is, Mr. President, I ask you to explain how this unfathomable sequence of events has been allowed to continue for over a decade. Does the government have no shame in destroying one man's life and wasting tens of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to punish a man who had the audacity to do two things: stand up for his constitutional rights and utilize proper channels provided to him to express concern for the citizens of our country? I am deeply saddened by our lives' events that Jeffrey and I have suffered and endured. You publicly committed to a transparent government led by your administration, yet it has been shrouded in mistruth and secrecy. Since you have started your push this summer to commute prison sentences for nonviolent offenders, will you not extend the same courtesy to an innocent man in prison? The second one is, how do you explain the obvious disparate treatment of General Petraeus? The Nobel Peace Prize laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu wrote a letter to Judge Leona Brinkema this spring, stating equality under the law as a cornerstone of justice is significantly at stake in the sentencing of Mr. Sterling. While I realize that no two cases are identical, the fact remains that charges akin to those for which Mr. Sterling was convicted have in recent years resulted in extremely disparate penalties. And lastly, President Obama, this is your opportunity to show Jeffrey, our country, and the world what it means to be a true leader by acknowledging a grave injustice has been done and making amends. This can only be accomplished by granting Jeffrey Alexander Sterling an immediate pardon. Thank you for listening.
Our next speaker is Delphine Halgand.
Thank you, Oli, for being here with us and for sharing the true story, your true story of Jeffrey, and for being here to fight for him today. Thank you to all of you for being here today. Actually, as you know, Reporters Without Borders is a press freedom organization, actually the largest press freedom organization defending journalists all over the world since 1985. As an organization that defends press freedom, that defends freedom of information, we are extremely concerned by the precedent set in the United States government case against Jeffrey Sterling. Jeffrey is now in jail for merely talking to a journalist. He was sentenced based only on circumstantial evidence. The evidence that formed the basis of his conviction consisted only of multiple emails and telephone conversation between the two men, James Risen and Jeffrey. Without any content to directly prove Jeffrey was the source, the content of most of his emails and phone conversation remains unknown. Only the metadata have been made public. Here is Reporters Without Borders' main concern. The DOJ built a case against Sterling based entirely on circumstantial evidence and obtained his conviction in what the BBC called a trial by metadata. How is it possible that proving the simple existence of contacts between a former CIA operative and a journalist is sufficient to convict someone of espionage? Is a relationship with a reporter the new catalyst for government prosecution of whistleblower, whether alleged or actual? If anybody can be sentenced in the United States just because he was merely talking to a journalist on a regular basis, where is press freedom heading in the country of the First Amendment? Actually, after the verdict, Attorney General Holder said, I guess we quote him a lot today, "As this verdict proves, it is possible to fully prosecute unauthorized disclosure that inflict harm upon our national security without interfering with journalists' ability to do their jobs." I'm sorry, but I disagree. It is really clear that the DOJ chose to make an example of Jeffrey, to warn government employees against talking to journalists. Leaks are the lifeblood of investigative journalism in this country, given that nearly all information related to national security is considered secret and classified. In fact, the war on whistleblower is designed to restrict all but officially approved version of events. The United States has witnessed an alarming trend in curtailing freedom of information these recent years. And as we heard earlier, President Obama, as we call it, war on whistleblowers, played an important role in this decline. Today, I'm here as the US Director of Reporters Without Borders to stand with Jeffrey and support him in his effort to appeal his conviction. And I'm here to stand with Holly to request a presidential pardon. Thank you.
And our last speaker before